My name is Jennifer Brown. I'm a reporter and a co-founder at the Colorado Sun. I write about a lot of different issues from homelessness to child welfare. And, I joke like 8% of my beat is about um, immigration. So bear with me. We're not going to talk about border policy exactly today, but I want this to be a conversation about assimilation of newcomers into our state. So in the past 2 years, Colorado has had um, about 43,000 new immigrants, migrants come through the state. These are people that have been housed and fed at least for some amount of time. Most of them began arriving around Christmas 2022 on buses from usually Texas, straight from the border. Some not really even planning to come to Colorado specifically, but that's where a bus was going. So they hopped on, arrived in many cases without winter boots or coats, getting off in the middle of the night in flip flops. And this prompted the city of Denver mainly to set up emergency operations to feed and shelter people. The city estimates that of these 40 plus thousand newcomers, maybe half have decided to stay in Colorado and start new lives here. The other half generally went to other cities across the country, mainly New York, Chicago, with one-way bus tickets that sometimes the city funded. So at this point, of course, resources are thin, and Colorado is now, at the center of this debate on immigration, migration. You may have seen the latest stress point in this is the presence of Venezuelan gang members in an Aurora apartment complex, and even former President Donald Trump saying that the whole town of Aurora had fallen to these gangs. So we're going to get into that a bit also. But, what has happened in the last 2 years is probably, the biggest influx of immigrants that Denver has had, like in such a short period of time. So, this causes a lot of tension and resources stretched thin, as I said. So we're going to talk about housing, jobs, and just the best way that Colorado can assimilate newcomers into our state. And we have a lot of previous experience with this in, refugees from Afghanistan, immigrants from Mexico, a lot of African nations, including Somalia. People from there have made their homes here. So we're going to dive into this. And let me introduce our amazing panelists up here. Next to me, I have Yali Reinoiso. In her home country of Venezuela, she was a criminal defense attorney. She arrived in Denver last December with her husband and her daughter. She left her country to escape poverty and political oppression that she'll tell us about. And she's helped other migrants since she got here apply for asylum. She can't practice law in Colorado yet, but maybe someday. But she has volunteered her time for months to help others at least fill out the paperwork and start the process of being legal residents. She did this through a nonprofit called All Souls. Next to Yali, we have Sarah Plastino. They're out of order on my paper. Sarah Plastino is the first ever director of the City and County of Denver's Newcomer program, which was started because of all of this migration that we're talking about here. Previously, she was the senior staff attorney in the detention program of the Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network. She focused on defense for indigent non-citizens detained in the custody of ICE and in proceedings before immigration court in Aurora. Then we have Nicole Cervera, pardon me. She's a native of Peru, and she is the policy and campaigns manager for the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition. And this organization helps smaller organizations across Colorado with policy analysis and advocacy work. And CIRC, as we call it for short, also has a legal services department to help people navigate the process of applying for citizenship. And then there on the end, we have Candace Marley. She is the founder and executive director of All Souls, which is a nonprofit focused on advocacy and outreach for the unhoused and migrant communities. She's also the owner of a small bookkeeping firm. And All Souls worked incredibly hard over the winter helping new migrants, especially those whose time ran out in the city-funded hotel rooms that were provided. And she helped them find other hotel rooms, apartments, even helped people survive the winter in the cold by providing tents and heaters, etc. So thank you all so much for being here again at 3 o'clock on a Friday. So Sarah, I wanted to start with you just to set the scene really of what we have been through in Colorado over the past nearly 2 years. And if you could describe, the numbers and the process that the city set up in order to help people survive once they got to town.
Thank you. Thank you for the big question and the generous introduction. It's nice to speak with you all today. So I have been in this position since February of this year. And in such a short time, the situation has really changed dramatically. As Jennifer said, we as a city have received over 43,000 newcomers from the southern border, including mi amiga aquí, Yali. We really have transitioned from an emergency response to a sustainable programmatic response. We've gone from having over 5,000 people in shelters across the city when I came on the job in February to now having 0 people in our shelter last night. And so we really have transitioned in terms of our policy and how we're actually implementing that policy over the course of the past 2 years when things have been fluctuating significantly. We have shifted from an emergency sheltering model to a model that more promotes and assists people in integrating into the community who have decided to make Denver home. And so that is why we founded the Denver Asylum Seeker Program, which is a novel program that we're very proud of. Basically, what we were doing is replicating a federal refugee resettlement program, but for asylum seekers here in Denver. And this is not something the federal government does for asylum seekers, so we had to build this from the ground up. So we're supporting people with rental assistance, job upskills training, English classes, legal clinics for free, all with the goal of helping people transition into the communities. So we've really come a long way from receiving 144 buses in December of last year from Texas to not having received a bus in the last 3 months. So the situation on the ground has really changed a lot as well.
Sarah, and at the height of this, I think at one point, maybe in January, there were more than 5,000 people, right, Sarah, being sheltered overnight. The city had 7 hotels that it was leasing to make sure people had a place to sleep at night. And we were getting like more than 200 people a day. I think I saw on the dashboard that the city keeps that now it's maybe like 5 people a day.
Yesterday, we received 2 people at our reception center versus last December, we would have 200 to 300 people arriving per day.
And I want you to talk more about the asylum program. Like, I understand that what the city has set up evolves based on the amount of people that are coming into town. However, can you talk more about the longer term reasons for why have an asylum program? Like, how do people sign up for that? Is it for everybody that came here from South America in the last 2 years, or how will that work and how will that set them up for success?
So we, of course, as a city community, do have limited resources. So we don't have infinite resources. So what we decided to do was try to provide very robust, comprehensive wraparound services to a smaller number of people to really assist those folks in successfully launching their lives in the United States. So we have about 865 people enrolled in this very comprehensive program. So they're in our first cohort. And we really designed this program to be a bridge from folks departing the shelter system into residing in the community in a self-sufficient way. So when we launched the program, we had hundreds of people a week leaving shelters. And it was a very difficult transition for the city and for all the folks who were leaving. So we saw a need for a program like this to basically help a large number of those people transition into their own rental units and to start succeeding and to receive work authorization. So the program will look different in the future because it's responsive to the need on the ground. We don't have the same large number of people needing assistance transitioning. And actually currently the flows of migration that we're seeing in Denver are really just similar to traditional migration flows. So we're just like any other big city in that respect.
Thank you. Yali, I wanted to go to you next. Can you tell us a little bit about why you came to the United States, what your life was like in Venezuela? And I know it can be a very long story, so not every detail, but if you can give it a taste of what that was like to make the trip here and how long it took you.
Ok, muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Pues yo fui abogada penalista en Venezuela, ¿ok? Tenía una organización de derechos humanos en Venezuela. Cuando se intentó pasar la comida de la ayuda humanitaria que hizo Estados Unidos hacia Venezuela, mi organización participó como cabecilla de la entrada de la ayuda humanitaria hacia Venezuela. De allí mi vida cambió totalmente. Empezó la persecución de parte del gobierno venezolano, trancaron frontera y tuve que quedarme del lado acá de Cúcuta, Colombia, y de allí lamentablemente pues no pude pasar a Venezuela. Empecé a recibir llamadas telefónicas de que me iban a secuestrar a mi hija y me vi en la obligación de entrar a Venezuela, a rescatar a mi hija. Cuando entré a Venezuela, en hora de las noches, pues lamentable mucho, pues ya me estaban esperando. Me secuestraron, me golpearon y no me mataron porque Dios es muy grande. Y allí pues tuve que salir de Venezuela, en hora de la madrugada salí de Venezuela y tuve que quedarme en Colombia porque mi esposo es colombiano. Y luego cuando empezaron los lazos entre Colombia y Venezuela, ya estaban persiguiendo a las personas que tenían ideales contrarios al gobierno venezolano. Y me vi en la obligación de empezar nuevamente a emigrar. Mi hija tiene una dificultad cognitiva, tiene autismo, y esto se nos complicó un poco la llegada acá a Estados Unidos. Tuvimos que entrar por la selva del Darién, en la cual la selva del Darién no es una selva, esa es una jungla totalmente horrible. Pues mi hija, casi pierdo la vida, con la vida de mi hija, por los ríos que tenemos que cruzar. Duramos 5 días metidos en una selva, durmiendo en carpas, y mi hija se la llevaba al río, y gloria a Dios, y me la pudieron salvar unas personas que estaban allí. Mi esposo tiene una dificultad también en una pierna, y en una de las orillas de un abismo, se fue al abismo y casi también perdía la vida. Lo tuvieron que sacar allí con ayuda de otras personas. Fue horrible la trayectoria. Mi hija tuvo una quemadura de 2º grado en toda su piel por el sol que llevamos durante la travesía de allí. Llegamos, pasamos allí y llegamos a la Ciudad de México. México también es un país totalmente horrible para pasar, no únicamente para Yali, para todos los emigrantes. Tuvimos que agarrar el tren que se llama el tren de la bestia, porque estuvimos esperando la cita de CBT One, nunca salió y tuvimos que entregarnos por frontera. Y durante la travesía del tren, yo casi pierdo la vida. ¿Por qué? Porque duramos como aproximadamente 5 días metido en el tren. La alimentación se nos acabó. Y tuve que salir del tren, el tren paró un poquito y salí a buscarle alimento a mi hija. Cuando fui a buscar alimento a mi hija, el tren arranca. Cuando el tren arranca, tuve que correr durísimo para poder agarrar el tren. Y la celda del tren me agarró los zapatos y me lo destrozó. Casi pierdo la vida allí también. La travesía nos duró aproximadamente 1 mes y medio para llegar a Estados Unidos. Llegamos acá en unos autobuses que nos dieron de manera gratuita y nos mandaron acá a Denver. En Denver llegamos a un albergue aproximadamente por 3 meses, porque llegamos en la época de invierno y duramos 3 meses allí. No, fue demasiado fuerte, demasiado duro, pero bueno, aquí ya estamos, gracias a Dios. Y bueno, allí pues conocí a personas muy buenas, gracias a Dios. Conocí a mi jefa, que todo el tiempo la llevo en mi corazón, que es mi jefa Candice. Me dio la oportunidad de ingresar y creyó en mí y me dio la oportunidad de ingresar a su organización.
Gracias, Yali. It's quite a powerful story that she has. Mm-hmm. I want to come back to you about what happened after you moved out of the hotel, but I want to go to Candace now to talk about how do you feel that it's worked, Candace? Like what the city was able to set up for newcomers. Sorry, we've only got 2, or one's broken. Tell us where you have seen, successes and also problems that have arisen in terms of trying to make sure that, for example, children aren't outside in Colorado.
I have to give Denver credit. I think they did a fantastic job, especially as compared to other cities that we're seeing right now. I think they responded as they could. We were in a very emergent situation. It was a crisis, so everybody was doing the best they can. And I think they've done fantastic. I love the asylum seekers program. I love how it's evolved. We have a family actually that's in that program. So I think the city's done a fantastic job.
Can you talk about some of the times that you scrambled to help people who were out of time in the hotel shelters?
That's kind of how we got involved. We got involved in the in Zunai encampment that was down off Zunai. At first, it was just so overwhelming, the need. It was getting everybody's shoes. People were in flip-flops. People were without coats. Kids were running around in shorts. It's freezing outside. So we were just going and gathering donations as quickly as we could to get them back out onto the street. That evolved pretty quickly as winter set in, that these people were in tents. The city did a great job of getting people with children out of the tents as quickly as possible. But a lot of the singles and couples were left in tents. So we started brainstorming, how do we keep tents warm? And so we found camping heaters, propane, and so then we were servicing that continually. So as the cities kind of had to evolve, as the crisis evolved, we evolved along with it.
Thank you. Nicole, maybe you could describe a bit more about what it is you do for CIRC, and with the lens of describing, how we can build off of what's been done so far and do better in terms of especially helping people get jobs and housing when they're new immigrants?
Yeah, so I also started my position this year. I actually started in July. I'm the policy and campaign manager for CIRC. And right now we have chosen our priorities. Aside from defense and immigration reform, we are also focused on healthcare, workers' rights, and economic opportunity, because as was understood by our community members and our membership, that those were going to be our priorities this coming years, for the next 3 years actually. And healthcare, and healthcare was able to be number one over housing or workers' rights, because our community members keep the motto "Sin salud no somos nada," and that's without healthcare we are nothing. So that's kind of what CIRC has just been doing starting this year that I've been working with them. Yeah.
Okay. Also, talk a little bit, Nicole, about you're a native of Peru. I love that we have two natives of South America sitting up here today. Talk about your experience coming to the United States and what policies helped you and what needs work.
Yeah, so I really love Yali's story because it shows how policies at the state level can really support our community members. I came to the United States when I was 4 years old from Lima, Peru, and I was raised like every other immigrant child that now has DACA or is a resident. We didn't trust the police. We had an escape plan. We knew that if our parents didn't come home at a certain time, we knew who to call. We knew how to walk to my aunt's house because we couldn't drive. These were like plans that children at the age of 6 and 7 were like made to understand. And I think that really elevated, in 2010 when we had those very heinous anti-immigrant policies, even here in Colorado with SB 90. And seeing that shift from when I was young to continued attacks on my community was very difficult. That time period of the early 2010s was very difficult for activists, I think, because we had been pushing for so long for reform, and then we were met with such vitriol. As the anti-immigrant movement grew, my parents really started to realize, like, we need to do something to protect your guys' future. Like, this can't be a consistent thing. We can't always have you guys, or me specifically as the eldest daughter, be the one responsible for my siblings, be the one that has to have an escape plan or a plan as a child. So with that in mind, around 2010, 2011, and all this vitriol is raising up, my parents decided to come here to Colorado because a lot of the activists here in Colorado were really, really fighting for our community in 2010, from 2009 to like 2010, starting the funding for CIRC. And in 2011, ASSET attempted to be passed, which was undocumented tuition. Undocumented students were able to obtain tuition here in Colorado. But in 2011, it wasn't passed. And so my parents were like, there's hope, right? People were fighting for this, and maybe it will happen. And then in 2012, the DACA program expanded. So my siblings and I were able to get on the DACA program. And then in 2013, SB 90 was repealed here in the state, and ASSET was passed. So all my siblings and I were able to go to school. I actually graduated from Corbell last year with 2 master's degrees. I feel like my story really shows that despite the national and federal immigration issues and policies that we face, the state can have such a powerful impact in protecting people like me, people like Yali and her family, that, we didn't choose these things. We didn't make these decisions for ourselves. And it gives us a way to fight for our future. I'm able to be sitting here in a panel filled with amazing experts. You know, something that at 18, I was told I wasn't even going to graduate. So I really think that the state has a very, very important role in supporting our community, and Denver and Colorado has shown that.
Thank you, Nicole. That's a good segue into one of the things I wanted to talk about in terms of the rhetoric and the national conversation on immigration. And, you know, those of you who've been following along, you know, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, this Venezuelan gang takeover at the apartments in Aurora. I went there. There wasn't any takeover. There are, you know, the Aurora Police Department has found, I think, 10 members of the Tren de Aragua gang are in the city of Aurora. Of course, there are also like 36 other gangs in Aurora. So it's all perspective, right? But, you know, I did have the opportunity to interview people who live there and heard their thoughts about, you know, how they're treated coming here. So I want to hear from any of you about that, but like what can be done? Like, how do we elevate the conversation so that, you know, when it's spoken of in a presidential debate, people don't have to fear for their lives. Like what you're saying, Nicole, it sounds like we've made so much progress, and then you wake up one day and look at the news and it seems like the same old thing.
I mean, I can start and then I can pass it to whoever wants to go. I think that we need to focus on actual policy issues. We are too focused on pitting one immigrant group against another. There was already standing problems in assimilation with our communities in like the rural areas of Colorado before newcomers came, right? So I feel like the problem is that we just keep concentrating on new wave of immigrants or the new person that's going to get the fault instead of really focusing on immigration reform. Like we haven't updated the Registry Act in over 40 years. We still have IRA, which like prohibits a lot of attorneys from doing their job. And so I think that the problem is that when we are being, you know, xenophobic and trying to focus on the gang problems, we are making an assumption about an entire community and also at the same time kind of negating the problem that brought them here in the first place, right? Like there's a system that does not allow them to be able to prosper in this country. So I don't know if maybe.
I'd love to add just that I think that Mayor Johnston of Denver and Mayor Kaufman of Aurora have done a really wonderful job of coming together and combating misinformation surrounding the issue of the Tren de Aragua in Aurora and in the community. You know, really making sure that the entire Venezuelan community here is not painted with a broad brush. And that, you know, the vast majority of everybody who came here seeking safety, seeking to work hard. And I think just as a government, we have to continue fighting against those false narratives and also at the same time, really elevating the positive stories rather than just focusing on the negative. We have these, you know, two strong, amazing women here who were willing to share their stories publicly with all of you, and that's very hard to do. And so we're always on the lookout for other people who are brave enough to share their stories to combat the negative stereotypes of the immigrant community.
Con las políticas que está manejando acá Estados Unidos, ¿no? Y que nos excluyen a casi todos los venezolanos diciendo que pertenecemos a un tren llamado el Tren de Aragua, pues no podemos tapar el sol con un dedo. hay personas, pero no somos todos, ¿ok? No somos todos. Habemos personas buenas como habemos personas malas en todos lados, ¿no? Entonces, de esa manera que nos señalan a todos, porque a todos nos señalan, ¿ok? Creo que habemos venezolanos que queremos cambiar ese tipo de idea, ideología que tienen esas personas, ¿no? Y demostrando la capacitación o el profesionalismo que tenemos algunos, porque hay muchísimos venezolanos que están acá, que son profesionales, que tienen unos buenos ideales, ¿ok? Y que no estamos acá porque queremos estar acá, no, estamos acá porque nos obligaron a estar acá. Y queremos, como yo se lo comentaba a mi esposo, queremos dar un vuelco, ¿no? Y decirle que los buenos somos más. Y aquí estamos luchando cada día con la xenofobia, con todo, pero acá estamos paraditos, ¿ok? Y demostrando que Venezuela sí tiene personas buenas, ¿ok?
Okay. Let's talk about getting work. You know, a segue from what we're talking about. I mean, I did interview people who said, you know, oh, I went to apply for a job when they found out I was Venezuelan. The job was no longer available. So that does exist out in the community. And Candace, I'll toss this one to you first, but I'd like to hear from any of you. You know, what are the current obstacles? And you know, obviously the legal ones like getting work authorization, but I think it's bigger than that in terms of people finding work so they can make a life here.
We're seeing a lot of people like that were in our camp that have work permits now that still cannot get work. And a lot of it is cultural. Like they don't know, you go on a computer, you go to Indeed, you know, this is how you fill out a job application. That's not what they are accustomed to doing. So work permits we thought would solve everything. They haven't solved everything. I think there's more assimilation that needs to be done. You know, learning some English customs. Yeah, it's still a struggle for people to get work.
I'll also add that we have a lot of licensure issues. As Yali mentioned, many people come to this country with degrees and skills and certifications. But in order to practice their trade, they need to become licensed under our laws. And that's a huge undertaking for somebody who's coming to a very new government and society. So those resources are scarce, and we absolutely need to continue to expand them so we can have folks like Yali practicing law here. Yes, and I don't know if you want to talk about any of the challenges you've had.
Una de las dificultades es el idioma. Es complicado la cuestión del idioma, pero es cuestión de buscar los medios, ¿ok? Ya conseguimos, por mi persona ya consiguió una escuela que me van a ayudar con el idioma, ¿ok? Porque esa es una de las trabas, el idioma, ¿ok? Y en el proceso de que he estado acá, pues se me ha complicado un poco el trabajo, porque muchas personas que estamos acá no tenemos la documentación necesaria para poder trabajar. Y dentro de esto está un permiso de trabajo y un seguri. Y lo primero que cuando usted va a aplicar a una empresa, lo que le solicitan es eso, ¿ok? Y muchas personas tenemos las ganas, pero tenemos las trabas también, ¿ok? Entonces es importante, como yo le decía a mis hermanos emigrantes, que nos pongamos al día con la documentación que solicita este país. Tenemos que estar bajo unos lineamientos que debemos cumplir y tienen que ponerse al día con las documentaciones, ¿ok? Pues yo creé, ¿ok? Me capacité para realizar los asilos, ¿ok? Y ahora estoy realizando asilo y ayudando a mis hermanos venezolanos, ¿ok? Con su asilo, con sus permisos de trabajo, con su cédula. Gracias a Dios le hemos dado muchísimas respuestas a muchísimas personas. Y bueno, ahora estoy esperando el personal, el mío, gracias a Dios. Ya cumplí el lapso establecido por las leyes estadounidenses y ya estoy esperando ya mi permiso. Y yo creo que con eso ya no va a ser ninguna traba para ya entrar a una empresa y poder hacer lo que más me gusta. Y me pareciera muy bueno convalidar mi título, ¿ok? Y ya dominar el idioma y poder ser parte de trabajo de un cuerpo de jurídico, ¿ok? Y trabajar con ellos. Ese es mi anhelo.
I was just going to add that that's exactly why CERC took on economic opportunity as our third priority. This is the feedback that we're getting back from community members that they really want to work. You know, there's not a lack of motivation from our community to be involved. There's not a lack of them for wanting to even study. Like they are willing to put that effort in. They're so funny. Our membership is so active, and they'll talk to me. They'll be like, "What if we partner with the schools? Would they be willing to like teach us? We'll learn." And like I love the fact that they're just willing to keep going. Like Yali was saying, you know, like she's trying and pushing forward, and that's what I've seen from every single community member that I've met since I started in July. So
I was wondering if any of you can give a reasonable estimate, like how long does it take to get a work permit? I mean, it seemed to happen a little bit faster for Yali, but, and also, you know, Sarah, like touch on the asylum process. Like we're talking years and years.
Yes. Okay. So how long it takes to get a work permit varies depending on your position in your immigration status and how you entered the United States. So people who only have a work permit eligibility through an asylum application, like Yali, need to file and then wait 6 months before the government can issue them a work permit. And so that's a minimum. After that, it usually comes within 30 days, but not always. And many things can delay that process or stop counting up to the number of days you need to hit the 6 months. Folks who entered through the ports of entry through an appointment with CBP1, like Yali mentioned, she was trying to get in Mexico but couldn't. Those folks are eligible for work permits, but you still have to apply for a work permit in English. It's very technical. You have to receive it in the mail. If you're moving or homeless, it's very difficult to find a stable address to mail your work permit. And also there are delays of many months often to receive that work permit. That's why we partnered actually with the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, which is the federal agency that issues work permits, to have city-led work permit clinics for people who went through CBP1 to actually have USCIS on site to grant the fee waiver, because it also costs money to apply for your work permit for CBP1 folks, and then to take fingerprints on site and to get the applications fast-tracked. And we were able to get them within 1 to 2 weeks in many cases. And we actually have worked with the government to get over 3,000 people work authorized through the CBP1 process. But those folks are the lucky ones because there are only a few CBP1 appointments. Many people wait for 6 months or more in Mexico, trying to do the right thing, trying to enter legally. But the situation is so desperate in Mexico that many folks are forced to enter without inspection and stuff.
Thank you. I wanted to talk to, I promise we'll turn it over to questions from you all in a few minutes, but I wanted to talk about something that concerns me, and is, you know, what happens after people who've, you know, maybe they've lived in one of the city funded hotel shelters for their amount of time, then they were helped through nonprofits that I believe are funded through, you know, some of our federal pandemic money and other sources to pay, say, a deposit on an apartment and then 2 months rent. And then after that, it's kind of like you're on your own, you've got this apartment. And when we're talking about this timeline for even legally being allowed to work, you know, are you concerned that in a couple of months from now or right now, we're going to see people who are not going to be able to pay their rent and, end up out on the streets. What's going to happen? And what do we do about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're seeing people on the street. I think that what they're doing is if they get evicted, they'll move into a friend's house. So we're seeing a lot of apartments with like 4 or 5 families in it and 1 or 2 bedrooms. And then once they get evicted from there, they move to another one. But with time, they'll gain their footing, and it takes time. It's expensive in Denver to live here. I mean, for us as citizens, so we can imagine the hardship that they have to go through.
Sí, hay organizaciones que a los inmigrantes, bueno, yo también entré en ese núcleo de inmigrante para salir de un refugio y poder obtener una vivienda, ¿no? Nos sostuvieron únicamente un solo mes. Entramos a un techo de una cantidad de dinero que para una sola familia es casi imposible cancelarlo. Entonces, ¿qué hacemos? Tratamos de reunir personas conocidas para poder dividir el monto del canon de arrendamiento acá. Pero también se presenta la situación de que hay muchos que entran por frontera y cuando entran por frontera se complica la situación en cuanto a los permisos de trabajo. Tienen que esperar los 150 días, que son los 6 meses, para poder obtener ya el permiso de trabajo, y de allí 30 días para que se lo den. Entonces eso ya es un proceso, pero mientras tanto que eso llegue, es poder sobrevivir y poder costear los gastos dentro de ese canon de arrendamiento. Entonces se nos complica enormemente.
Yali, keep that for 1 sec. I wonder when people from home, from Venezuela, ask you about, is it worth it to come? What do you say? I mean, considering all the hardships after you arrived and, the fear of only having, 1 month's rent, like, what do you tell them?
Bueno, yo digo que sí vale la pena, ¿no? Que sí vale la pena estar en este país. Lo que hay que echarles ganas, ¿ok? Ser optimista, ser positivista de que sí lo vamos a lograr. Sé que es complicado, sé que es fuerte, que nos toca a veces hacer trabajo que no nos gusta, ¿ok? Trabajos demasiado engorrosos para las mujeres más que todo, que nos toca duro trabajar albañilería, trabajar lo que consigamos, ¿ok? Pero las ganas las tenemos y eso es lo importante y sí vale la pena. Más que todo que tenemos familias en Venezuela que también corren peligro y la situación económica del país cada día se empeora más y más y más. Y la esperanza de ello es la ayuda que le mandamos las personas que estamos fuera de ese país y ellos confían en nosotros y no lo debemos defraudar. Tenemos que echarle las ganas. Gracias.
Sarah, just quickly, what is the budget for the asylum program, or like the total city budget for this year for the newcomer division, or whatever it's called formally?
So the Newcomer program budget this year is $90 million. We're going to come out under budget. We hope to transfer about 22 million back to the general fund, and then also have a significantly smaller amount to fund our budget for next year out of the 90 million. So we've done, a really good job of being mindful and being very smart with taxpayer dollars while balancing, safety of newcomers and designing good policy.
Okay, thank you. I think we just have, 15 minutes or so left. If anyone in the audience would like to ask any of our panelists any questions. Yes, please.
much back and forth there is between Aurora and Denver, like in the southeast city administration, not the elected people, but the city manager. And are you working with them? Are you all trading ideas, or is it?
We actually have a really great relationship with Aurora. We, of course, respect their autonomy. And so we will offer our help, but we will only intervene if requested as part of respect between neighboring governments. But our mayors speak frequently, and we have key staff members who handle intergovernmental relations in the mayor's office. And I know they communicate all the time. Our communications departments communicate all the time. And our nonprofits, while they're in Denver or in Aurora, are all serving the same community of people. And so they collaborate all the time. So there is a lot of cross pollination between the two cities.
And just to follow up with that, because it's a question that I had on my list as well, but I mean, a lot of the public money that flowed through nonprofits that I referenced earlier that goes to pay for people's rent for a month or two, the nonprofits that fund these apartments and help people move in are often in Aurora, not Denver, especially the ones that we're talking about that have been in the national news. Does that create tension, when Denver, I know you guys don't use the term sanctuary city, but people understand what I'm saying. And other cities like Colorado Springs are not, Aurora is not. Like, how does that affect the relationship? I mean, there must be some tension over that when a lot of the newcomers to Denver are placed in Aurora, all kind of in the same few apartment complexes, which were not in good shape, frankly. I mean, those are, run by a slumlord.
So I just want to be clear that the folks chose their own apartments. They weren't placed anywhere. Everybody selected their own apartment. And of course, a person who's brand new to this country with very few assets is going to look for the most affordable rent for them and their family, and oftentimes share an apartment with many other families because the cost of living is, exorbitant, as we know. And so that is how many folks ended up in Aurora, was just by the relative affordability of Aurora, which is a good thing. We are one metro area, one economy. And, while of course they're different municipalities, we are part of one larger system. And so folks really look to resources wherever they might be, and cross city lines all the time when trying to establish lives and contribute here.
I think you had one more question.
Yes, I was hearing your story of how you came into hard to imagine people doing that, and then all of the trouble that since you've been here, it's hard to hear. Is there hope someday that you can go back? Do you feel as if you're in exile, sort of? Is there a hope that you can go home someday? Or you felt like this is it and you're done this bit?
Quisiera regresar. Quisiera regresar. Vamos a utilizarlo. Ok, sí quisiera regresar. Está mi familia, está mi mami, mi padre, que desde el 2017 no le doy un abrazo. Es fuerte, es fuerte. Quisiera regresar, pero regresar para mí significaría la muerte. Y hasta que no caiga el gobierno, imposible entrar, ya que soy punto blanco dentro del gobierno nacional de Venezuela y de una u otra forma me perseguirían, ya que en Venezuela pues los órganos de seguridad trabajan conjunto con el gobierno tanto Guardia Nacional, Policía Nacional Bolivariana, Cuerpo de Investigaciones Científicas Penales y Criminalística, que son el 6CPC. Todos ellos trabajan con los organismos de seguridad del Estado, y si regresaría a Venezuela significaría secuestro, muerte, o que mi hija viviría otro episodio que ocurrió en Venezuela con su secuestro. Entonces, mientras tanto, no puedo hacerlo. Mi corazón allá, pero mi físico acá. No existe otra.
Anybody else in the audience have questions?
I don't think we can generalize. I think that many have multiple funding sources between the foundation sector, donations, multiple different grants from different governmental institutions, whether that's DPS or the state Office of New Americans or the city. There really are many entities supporting this work, but certainly the demand for help is far greater than resources have addressed so far. So I would absolutely encourage any parties who'd be interested in funding any gaps, probably to connect with the Rose Community Foundation, which houses the Newcomer Fund.
I'll ask the last question if no one has a burning question they want to ask. We talked a lot about Denver and Aurora, but the newcomers who've arrived in Colorado in the last couple of years have also spread to other cities, and maybe Nicole can address this best, and she works with people across the state. But I was curious of, what are the growing pains or needs in other towns, such as, Carbondale, I know is one.
Yeah, so what we're getting back feedback from the community, especially in the rural parts of Colorado, is just an increase in already existing issues, right? So rural areas in Colorado are, especially thinking about like really far away from like Carbondale, right? So those areas already face, like our immigrants community already face struggles there. And they face struggles in assimilation, those who've already been here. So newcomers moving into those areas is almost, it's exasperating the problem, and not to their fault. It's just making it seem worse. It was an already existing problem. There's already a housing problem. There's a lack of jobs, or if they do have jobs right now, what we're hearing is also there's, trafficking, labor trafficking that is going on. And so I feel like in the rural areas, what we're seeing is more of these like workers' rights, housing justice, but in like the extreme, right? Labor trafficking, or 20 people sharing a 1-bedroom in Vail, like those types of scenarios. Whereas maybe here, it might be a little bit lessened in a way, or maybe like there's more resources available versus in those areas. And especially because the cities have, refused to do a lot of the cooperative work that Denver has been doing. So for us as organizers and as an organization has been to kind of elevate their voices, right? One of the main things that is very difficult with immigration policy is that people tell us what we need, and they don't much listen to what we actually, like our realities, right? We have this amazing Omni Salud program that is for undocumented immigrants, but does anybody know anybody who has it? Like, because I know one person, and we've passed these amazing and progressive policies, but we don't notice or care to notice the actual impact of these policies. Are people actually going to the doctor because they have mi salud? Or are they being turned away? Like, I have heard a bunch of feedback from the rural community that they can't even go into the emergency room because they are turned away because of the color of their skin, because they can't speak English. I still have to interpret for my mom over the phone at 28 years old because a dermatologist's office refuses to do that job. You know, like, I feel like the progressive policies that we pass for housing, for workers' rights, for immigrant rights, we really have to think about the impact to the community, and we have to try and take into account their voices, right? Is the program working? How is the program working? And can it be replicated? Especially for our rural communities, they are always ignored in many of our policy areas, not just immigration, but it makes it much harder, right, to fight with lack of funding or less organizations. CIRC has done an amazing job at activating communities so they want to create their own organizations. We have a bunch of little organizations that are just volunteer runs. They're not real C3s, but they have that motivation in them to help their community do Medicaid applications, to help their community do housing applications. And that is the way that CIRC does small supports in the rural areas right now, and where we're hoping to increase, you know. We're hoping to expand our Know Your Rights training and be able to support our community members as much as possible.
Thanks, Nicole. And I think you touched on a good ending point, really, which is that, you know, the problems that we're talking about, housing, employment, healthcare, these are problems that existed in our communities before, and they will continue to exist. And when you have a new group of people move in, it's just exacerbating the problems that already existed. So thank you all for sticking it out through the end of our SunFest. We're so happy that you came, and thanks to our sponsors and all of our wonderful members and readers, and I'm sure anyone up here would be happy to answer questions. And thank you, Yali, for telling that hard to tell story again. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Sarah, Nicole, Candace. I really appreciate all of you being here today. Have a good weekend.